The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. The Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition is launching a 6-figure ad campaign. They are calling on President Biden to take immediate action to restore and expand Bears Ears National Monument in southeast Utah. Clark Danakongva, the vice chairman of the Hopi tribe and co-chair of the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, emphasized the cultural significance of the area to his clan, saying, "My bloodline and culture comes from Bears Ear. My clan migrated through the area. If your eyes are open, the evidence is everywhere." The ad will start running Sunday in the Salt Lake Tribune. On Monday, Vice President Kamala Harris held a virtual listening session at the White House on the digital divide. The session covered how investments in the American Jobs Plan will ensure every American has access to affordable, high-speed internet. President Biden's $100 billion proposal to future-proof broadband is part of an 8-year infrastructure plan. The vice president called high-speed connections the new electricity that is now a necessity for all Americans. Erin Payment is the chairperson for the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Payment, who was invited to the session, spoke about using telehealth to meet tribal citizens' health needs.
For us to continue to move in that direction, to bring services to people, to meet them where their needs are, rather than having them have to come to us, we have to really build that infrastructure for broadband and also not be so dependent.
The vice president ended the listening session by acknowledging that internet access is also a civil rights issue, and it is about equity and fairness. The affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians hear from the nation's top COVID expert. The group, which is based in Portland, Oregon, met with Dr. Anthony Fauci. Fauci spoke about COVID-19 and how much it has affected Indian country. Leaders told him they are seeing an increase in COVID-19 infections in teenagers. The discussion helped them identify the most effective approaches to protecting all members of their communities. According to the Indian Health Service, 1 in nearly every 500 Native Americans has died since the pandemic began. Well, new research suggests Indigenous patients in Canada are facing higher risks of death after surgery. Doctors say the study by the Canadian Medical Association Journal is just the tip of the iceberg. The research involved 190,000 people who identify as Indigenous. The study looks at the surgical outcomes for Indigenous patients in Canada across a range of procedures. First Nations are nearly a third more likely to die after their procedures than other populations in Canada, and they face higher risks of complications. The research comes amid a national reckoning over anti-Indigenous racism in the Canadian healthcare system. Joyce Echaquan, a 37-year-old First Nations woman, died last September in a Quebec hospital. Before she died, she went on Facebook Live and showed staff making derogatory comments about her. Jason McVicker, who is Métis, is a doctor and lead author of the study. McVicker says the study tells Canadians 2 things: that they need better data, and that the data tells them they need to do better. A Maori woman is being named New Zealand's next Governor General. Cindy Kiro is the first Indigenous woman appointed to the position and holds the title of Dame for her service to the community. Kiro says she hopes to inspire Maori girls in her new role. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern picked Kiro for the largely ceremonial role as Queen Elizabeth's representative. Ardern says that Dame Kiro has demonstrated her passion for the well-being of children, as well as education and learning. Kiro is currently chief executive of the Royal Society, a nonprofit group that advocates for science research. Kiro's 5-year term begins in October of this year. As some companies literally start selling tickets to space, the question has come up about what to call the buyers. Can anyone traveling to space be called an astronaut? The Oxford Dictionary defines astronaut as a person who is trained to travel in a spacecraft. Even NASA astronauts are undecided. John Harrington is Chickasaw, and he's the first Native American astronaut. And in 2006, he spent 14 days in space and performed 3 spacewalks. He explains the process of how you earn the title of a NASA astronaut.
From a professional perspective, we when you first get assigned to the astronaut office, you're called an astronaut candidate. You're a candidate to become an astronaut, and they don't determine that until after about a year and a half of classes. They finally say you're eligible for flight assignment. That's what that comes out as. So, and they give you a little silver pin that looks like a shooting star, and it's the original Mercury 7 designed this pin, and it's a lapel pin essentially. Once you fly in space, though, you get that's transitioned to a gold pin. You get a gold one, and you're considered an astronaut.
Harrington also defines space travelers as space tourists or space participants. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Are you one of many Americans who have paid down your credit card debt this year?
You might notice that banks are sending out more offers for more credit. We'll look at how you can manage credit card debt when we come back. Good news about the amount of credit card debt that Americans are carrying these days. It's going down as people pay off their cards. Yet that good news is coming with tempting offers for more credit. The Wall Street Journal reports that banks are starting to offer more cards, and you may be seeing them soon in your mailbox. Patrice Kunish is a lawyer and has banking experience. She has established the Center for Indian Country Development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. She's also worked as the Deputy Solicitor for Indian Affairs at the Department of Interior. Today she owns Pahin Ha Consulting. Patrice Kunish joins us now to explain more about how credit cards work. Welcome.
Good morning and Petu Washte. Happy to be here with you, Mark. This is really a remarkable opportunity for Indian country and for other underserved communities who haven't had the access to credit or capital for a very, very long time. But it does come with some risks, and I think it's very important that we understand the parameters of this new program.
It's interesting because there are so many things we don't think of with the pandemic on just how it's changed daily life. And paying down credit cards was probably not at the top of anyone's list, but it started to happen.
Yeah, from an economic perspective, this is a rational behavior. When you don't have access to spending opportunities, you're feeling very insecure or financially vulnerable, you do tend to pay down your debt. And here, Americans overwhelmingly paid their credit cards, paid them on time, and paid them in full. But this also had a consequence to the credit card companies. They're not making as much money off of interest rates and fees and merchant swipes. So a big part of this is perhaps regenerating the industry. It's also interesting, part of a government-backed initiative to help stimulate the economy, get credit to these underserved communities, and really make sure that we can repair the wreckages of the COVID pandemic.
So if consumers start to see these new offers flood in, how's the best way to be rational about what's needed and what's the next steps?
Right. So the way this works is that the credit card companies will work with banks, look at the depository accounts history over time. Are they paying on time? Do they have overdrafts? So the amazing thing is that we're revolutionizing, reforming the credit card industry, which is really important to expand the concept of credit worthiness. And the problem or the implications for Indian country is that a healthy percentage, 18% of Native Americans are unbanked. So they still may be a population that won't have access to this new offer. The other concern, of course, is that the historical lack of credit in Indian country. There really are no banks. We've been victims of predatory lending, cash checking, gouges, discrimination and redlining. We haven't been able to buy houses with mortgages and cars and just deal with typical emergency funds. So while this expansion of credit worthiness using non-traditional underwriting or more lenient credit review, we also want to make sure that we make good decisions, and this is a good cultural fit. You know, we want to be good financial citizens. We learned this post-Cobell. We had a real big experience on the Blackfeet Reservation with Pecani money, you know, this sudden money. So being good financial citizens, we want to have good credit cards with reasonable rates, reasonable limits, and we want to couple that with counseling and financial education. I think one of the most terrific stories in all of this is that Native CDFIs and other Native American financial institutions like credit unions and Native-owned banks are really helping Native Americans and Alaskan Natives transition from being unbanked to some traditional banking services. And the way they do that is really not selling loan products or credit services or what have you. They really are focused on the individual and what makes that person credit worthy. We have a lot of farmers and ranchers in Indian country, a lot of seasonal workers, for example, in Alaska with the fisheries. That seasonal income is not going to show in a traditional credit worthiness score. So this has really opened up tremendous opportunities for more access to credit and very necessary credit. You might know, Mark, that 2/3 of the US economy depends on spending, depends on this flow of credit. And Native American people, American Indian tribes are really a very important part of the US economy. So we want to make sure that we have every opportunity to participate, but on the terms that fit our needs and our communities.
You mentioned Unbank and predatory lending, and let me ask on both of those. We know there's a great many people that will use pawn shops or check cashing places. Is this a route out of that?
It certainly is, and I want to mention the very, very valuable importance of having a relationship with a bank. You know, during the pandemic, we saw a lot of assistance being directly deposited almost automatically into bank accounts, right? We had the stimulus checks, we had the unemployment benefits, and it's a way to get the tax returns to the taxpayer very quickly. We get food vouchers, you know, food stamps, you know, directly deposited. So we want to normalize things for Native Americans, undoubtedly, but we also want to avoid the predatory lenders, those that are really gouging Indian country, that are taking the 20-25% off of each check, you know, individual check. The other importance of this is that the American Rescue Plan anticipates child tax credit. Now, this is an incredibly important part of getting out of poverty and supporting families. Well, these benefits are going to be deposited into bank accounts. So it's incredibly important, again, that we have a relationship with a bank and avoid the paper checks, presenting them at a cash checker, they take their percentage, and again, we're left with less. So it's not just avoiding the bad, it's moving toward something really good and beneficial for all of us.
And you mentioned credit unions. It's probably worth mentioning that most credit unions are nonprofits, and they're there to serve people rather than to be in business for profit centers.
You're so right, Mark. The opposite of bank, which is, revenue driven, profit driven, that's why they charge the high interest rates and the fees, is credit unions and CDFIs. Their mission is solely focused on the community. We have Lakota funds on Pine Ridge making phenomenal inroads into housing stability, or four bands at Cheyenne River that are really creating business opportunities. Citizen Potawatomi CDC really increasing overall preparedness in terms of financial security. So they are an incredibly important part of the banking system in Indian country, probably the only real transformation players in Indian country.
Well, in fact, the American Rescue Plan also includes loan guarantees for small businesses working with their local community development.
That's right. So here we have a surge of funds coming from the federal government. We have native CDFIs becoming intermediaries for example, the rural development housing loans. So CDFIs, native CDFIs, will be recipients of these funds and can disperse them rapidly, quickly, getting them right into the hands of the consumers who need them the most. And of course, building the economies, building back our economies post-pandemic should be our biggest priority.
And I know, as economists talk about this all the time, that really for tribal communities, the goal is to get that dollar to turn over within the community rather than just have it evaporate.
And that's so that's so important to having these financial institutions located in the community, because not only do they receive the funds and deploy the funds, they know what the needs of the community are, so they can respond rapidly in time and get the funds moving. They also know that the value of the dollar spent on the reservation, as you said, multiplies and revolves. So if we have a business loan on the reservation for a grocery store, for example, you're attracting more customers to the reservation, you're attracting more employees to the community, and it's an overall accelerating, enhancing benefit.
We only have about a minute, but I want to, I guess, what's the biggest takeaway from all of this for the average person?
Well, credit cards are debt, right? And we want to be super careful about excessive debt. We don't want to encourage somebody who's already financially vulnerable to go even further into debt. So we want to take a look at the unprepared borrower, let's say, and make sure that it's a good card. It might be a reasonable limit of $500 to $1,000. It needs to be a good plan. Look at the interest rates. And obviously having the means to pay and stick to it to create that credit history and building up to better credit.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And we'll be right back. John Tasuda III is a regular contributor to Indian Country Today. In 2002, he worked as staff director for the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. He is also a former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs and served in that position from 2017 to 2020. Today, he is a partner with Navigators Global, which is a company that provides political services to several industries, including tribes. John Tasuda joins us now to talk about policy and the impact in Indian country. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Mark. Always good to join you.
So let's start with the big one, $20 billion. How do we just talk about the American Rescue Plan and how it's being dispersed?
Yeah, it's a lot of money, isn't it? So the first distribution is going out as we speak. I'm told by a number of tribal leaders that they're starting to be informed of their allocations. I'm not sure of the timing of when it will actually hit the tribal accounts at Treasury, but should be any day, I would guess. It's really divided up, much as it was the first last year's in the CARES Act, into two pots, one which is calculated based on tribal population or enrollment numbers, and the next is based more on economic factors like employment. And so that the first allocation going out now is based on the tribal enrollment numbers. That's an easy one for Treasury and especially the Department of Interior to give numbers and make some calculations on. It's a little over $12 billion, I think, going out in that chunk.
This is going to present all kinds of new challenges for both the federal government and for tribes. Looking at it from the Fed side, how do you make sure that the money is spent in the way Congress intended?
Well, that's a really good question. And, the language is slightly different in the American Rescue Plan than it was in the CARES Act, which I assume, I think is some lessons learned. The CARES Act funding and the language authorizing it was put together extremely quickly last year, as a fast response to the pandemic and the impacts of shutting down the economy. There's a little more clarification about what qualifies, a little more clarification about who is eligible, and which, as you will recall, there was some litigation and holdup of some of the funding based on the CARES Act definition of a tribal government. And so looks like they've cleared that up in this, so that provides some clarity. I think that, again, though, in the interest of providing a lot of flexibility, both the Congress and Treasury, who, by the way, Treasury has put out an interim rule to give some guidance, but there's not a lot of guidance in the guidance because they want to give a lot of flexibility, and they just give some warnings really about things that you want to be careful of and probably not do. And the really big one in that is per capita distributions. There were some tribes that came very close to doing that with the CARES Act funding, which was, they were also told was not something that was an eligible use. And again, they get that warning. Although, interestingly, there is a little piece in this one, in this guidance from Treasury that says, if it looks like you're following the same rules that the federal government did in distributing money, to people on a lower income scale, then you might be in a safe zone. So that's, that would be something that the tribe should take carefully. I would add this caution: it's very complicated. Hire an attorney for tribal councils and tribal executives who are going through this. Be sure you want to have legal counsel, because again, there is, just as there was with the CARES Act, significant review by the Inspector General's offices, from Treasury and from the other agencies that are involved, and they will be looking closely.
Yeah, that's really extraordinary when you think about it. The federal government could say, don't do per capita, not like what we did.
Exactly.
The other challenge is on the employment side, and tribes have really significant roles as employers, both in their regional economy and in the tribal economy. How do you think that one will shake out?
Well, again, another interesting one. That was a difficult calculation, I know, in 2020 in the CARES Act, trying to figure out employment numbers as part of the calculus on economic impact to tribes. And I don't know that they have really figured that out yet. I would suggest that as a starting basis, that tribes ought to cast broadly and look at all the people that are employed within their jurisdiction, and consider whether they should be classified as part of their employment numbers within, even if they're not directly employed by the tribe. If the tribe is involved in some way in that business, even maybe in a regulatory fashion, they should give some look to that. Again, you want to have careful counsel from an attorney to help you go through that. But those numbers, have to be submitted to Treasury very quickly. So I think, again, casting as broad a net as you think you can will be helpful. There's about $6.5 billion plus that will be in that tranche of funding or allocation that goes out to the tribes. So there's a significant amount of money there as well for tribes.
We only have about a minute left, but I wanted to ask you, not every tribe is large and has big accounting departments and legal services. How is this going to work for the very small tribes?
Well, that's a real conundrum, and it was a problem in the CARES Act. Small tribes are trying to do the best they can. And obviously the safest thing would be to just be as cautious as possible, but sometimes that doesn't provide your people the level of help that you want to. So it's a difficult question. Again, if you can, hire a lawyer.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Join us again tomorrow and online at IndianCountryToday.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing Rock. This is Indian Country Today.